Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for OUA football. Me and Tom are back on the mics as we cross the halfway point of the OUA season. Tom, this was another explosive weekend of OUA football. Some gaudy scores across the board, making that Miami-Denver NFL game looking like nothing. We'll obviously dive into those games. We're going to get into some of our midway point remarks. As a quick programming note, we actually figured, as we often can be long-winded in our analysis, I'll take the blunt of that one myself, or the brunt of that one, I should say. We're going to actually have that as a whole separate podcast. But Tom, as always, how the heck are you doing, my friend?
I am doing great, my friend. Very, very well. It was another fantastic weekend of OUA football, which is always cause for celebration here, even if certain teams don't perform very well.
Yeah, no, this is really, it makes sense as we're crossing into the midway point, or crossing that midway point where we're really getting such a strong sense of just who the contenders are, who the pretenders are, and everything and everywhere in between in so many ways. Because I'm sure, like yourself, I've been racking my brain about the different types of shout outs we want to give as far as the contenders for, top quarterbacks, who we think are the Yates Cup contenders and things like that. It just is so hard not to look at that Western and Windsor matchup next week and be like, I need one more week. But we've put this off for too long. Of course, as I said, we're technically putting it off for an additional day. Hey, folks, it's 8:40 on a Monday night right now. Me and Tom are just diving into this action. It'll probably be Tuesday, but before the time I'm saying our final words for these two podcasts. So, if you're enjoying the content, hey, we're here for you, and we're here for all these great athletes. So let's start as we normally do with a bit of hardware handing out. And let's start on the offensive side of the ball. Tom, I'll hand this one to you. As we've had a few occasions on the year, it's really just some great performances that we'll get to when we get through all these games. But there's really one guy that needs to be lauded right here.
Yeah, and listen, there's been a few times now where we've awarded the offensive player of the week to some of the people who go up against the York Lions, and that's no exception this week. However, even despite that, Tristan Aboud's day against them was unbelievable. He goes 16 for 16, 384 yards, and 6 touchdowns. Regardless of who he's playing against, that is impressive. Tristan Aboud is our offensive player of the week.
Yeah, without a doubt. It very easily could have also gone to his running back, but we'll get into all the details of what went down at Alumni Stadium for Guelph's homecoming in just a little bit. Defensively, this one's tough because I'm going to leave you the individual who, once again, some really great games, but I think the individual who, in a more objective manner, I'll word it like that, in a more objective manner, had perhaps the better weekend, the better day on the field. But, and I know you're in lockstep with me on this, Tom, anytime a man over 300 pounds gets the ball in his hand, let alone does what Mufta Ageli does after he got the ball in his hands on the interception, which is take it into the crib for the pick six, he deserves a shout out. He adds a sack and a half on the day. And, we'll talk about Mufta and that defensive line and that defense in general for Windsor that's made them so formidable. And it starts on that defensive line. But Tom, who else did we want to shout out here?
Yeah, Mufta, absolutely fantastic job. Like you said, anytime an offensive or defensive lineman can get their hands on the ball, get into the end zone, you just know Zach and I were celebrating like crazy.
100%.
My pick for the defensive player of the week is going to somebody on that Laurier defense, and it's not Ethan Gregorczyk. I think this player has been a little sick and tired of hearing about the first-year rookie phenom and wanted to showcase, you know what? I still got some in the tank to do this. It is Ife Onyemaenem with 5.5 total tackles, 1 sack, 2 tackles for loss, a forced fumble, and 2 interceptions. This dude was playing lights out all game against McMaster and was really, really impressive to watch. Ife, well done, sir. You are more than deserving of this award.
Yeah, if you had him on your fantasy defense for this week, you were racking up points with the production that he was getting you on the defensive front. Special teams, I believe, Tom, once again, we are in lockstep with this one, and it just goes to the gaudy nature of the performance the Guelph Griffins were putting up on Saturday, where, they were killing it in the passing game, in the run game on offense. Their defense was doing their thing, and to boot, they had Anakin, don't call me Skywalker, Guthrie, returning kicks. And honestly, it's poetic in some sense. The kid's going into he's in the midst of his second year with Guelph's native son, the crown prince, if you will, the son of Mayor Cam Guthrie. I believe Cam Guthrie's still the mayor there. If I'm wrong, then I'm wrong. Oh, well. But, he returns 4 kicks for 4 punts, I should specify, for 152 and a long of 74 that, of course, netted him the touchdown. It's honestly so much fun watching him run. He reminds me, especially, of in the Guelph colors of when we had Ryan Newesteeg, who again was a guy who was not the biggest built guy, though Newesteeg was jacked and just a little muscle hamster out there running the ball. So a heck of a weekend for Guthrie, and a great day for the city of Guelph there. Is there anyone else we're shouting out on specials?
There was a few folks that did pretty well. We couldn't technically go to Gabriel Canabrava for the Guelph Griffins as well. 1 field goal and then 11 for 11 on those extra points, which nets some 15 points, which gives you, if you haven't seen it already, a little bit of a sneak peek into this Guelph York game. But no, I think Anakin is more than deserving of this.
Yeah, so we'll get into that game and we'll talk about all the different individuals that, made that day so spectacular in Guelph. But we will start with another homecoming. 3 homecomings this weekend, kind of nifty. But the one that took place in the Forest City, in the city of London, where the Western Mustangs took out the Ottawa Gee-Gees to the tune of 50-17. Tom, this was a game that in the early throws was uber competitive. It obviously starts off with Amilcar Polk busting his 59-yard run right away. And, we've talked before about when you look at a player's stats and, despite so many angles to actually attack this game at that, Amilcar had a great game, but I'm even wondering if I'm starting this in the right place. But whatever, where we were thinking about, he's been so prolific. He's a sneaky dark horse MVP candidate in his own right. If the Gee-Gees can end up on a few more of the W sides of the ledger than the loss sides, which of course in these last 2 weeks, this one more so than that Windsor game, they of course have found themselves in the losing column. But we talked about with how great he's been performing, yet how stout that Western defense and specifically their run defense has been, what was going to bend first. And, it really is such a deserving tip of the cap to Amilcar, where despite the outcome of this game, in terms of obviously the final score, and it was a classic Western game where that ball started to roll, that snowball started to collect more and more mass, and just before you knew it, it was just too overwhelming of a force to hold up against. Polk ends up with 17 carries for 140 yards, 2 touchdowns, a long of 59. And we was like, what was going to break first? Was he going to have a game where he was held under 100, or was Western going to give up a game where they had a single runner accumulate more than 100 yards rushing against them? So in some ways, just like as a fan of what Polk's done for specifically this year, but even going back to being JP Simonkinda's second running mate, phenomenal performance by Polk. I'll just throw that out to start, Tom.
Oh my goodness. Yes, absolutely. Against a team, and we kind of called it out beforehand, that certainly would have been aware of how dangerous this kid is and wanting to make sure that they tried to limit him as best as possible. 17 attempts, 140 yards, and 2 touchdowns later with a long of 59. Yeah, Mr. Polk is showcasing why, hey, don't forget about me in that little OUA MVP column that you guys are going to be talking about.
Yeah. Now, obviously, in this one, at the end of the day, Hillock racks up the 23 for 27. I mean, just it's so amazing how it's another classic Western thing where the team as a whole is so good. And I feel like we normally have this conversation in regards to their defense, where they have such a sound defense on all levels that you kind of forget about a Danny Valente Jr. You can forget about some of these stars in their various positions, even when Deontay Knight was in the mix for them on the defensive line. But 23 for 27, 318, 3 touchdowns. Keon Edwards on the ground, adding in 126 and 2 touchdowns of his own. that was another big touching point for us, or another point of contention. This one was coming off that Windsor game for this Ottawa defense, seeing a lot of guys go down in that one. I mean, I thought I saw our guy Dhaliwal out there, but I'm looking through the defensive stats for Ottawa, I'm not seeing his name out there. And if he was out there, I'm certain he would have been racking up a tackle. So he was someone we saw go down in that game. And I guess we're not seeing him in here. You know, we are seeing Kevin McTominay's name, even though he was a bit banged up. Both Cumberbatch brothers are in the mix. But I don't see Cruikshank's name in here, seeing him go down. So that was obviously a big thing and a big area where they were going to perhaps get gashed or had the ability to get gashed. But I suppose what surprised you more? Because on the other side of the ledger, we had a big surprise at quarterback. I guess just in the grand scheme of things, despite the outcome, what Ottawa was still able to compile offensively, like 17 points. I get it. It's not a lot, but given they had a backup quarterback in there, or did you feel like, given the circumstances, once again, despite the outcome of 50 points, did their defense feel a bit more formidable in the wake of having to take on the Western Mustangs? So a banged up defense against this juggernaut offense for the Mustangs. Put aside the 50 piece, we actually watched the games. We saw the flow of it. We saw them hang in there. Or were you more impressed about, once again, with the young second-year quarterback in Josh Jansen leading the GGs on offense? 17 points, not great, but given the circumstances, still, hey, not too shabby.
Yeah, no, certainly. I think this Ottawa defense definitely played well. I think they played better than that 50 point, the 50 points that they let up. But I'm really impressed with Josh Jansen here. He's a third stringer. Remember, folks, Ben Miracle, Ryan LeCandro, and then Josh.
True.
And he was playing very, very well. I mean, 19 for 24, 213 and one interception. Maybe doesn't jump off the page, but 19 for 24, that completion percentage when you're the third string quarterback, like that was really impressive. And certainly, yes, the score 50-17, whatever, but like at halftime, it's 14-10. And Ottawa is right in it. Like I really felt like Ottawa had the opportunity to come back in this game, even like late going into the end of the third quarter here. And then the fourth quarter, Western really kind of opened things up, but still like, I love the throws that he was making. He seemed to have some pretty decent chemistry with the receivers that was there. Nicholas Gendron was certainly his favorite target with 5 catches for 51 yards. But like Kerwin Gist, 4 catches, 54 yards. Robin Kalud, 3 catches, 46 yards. Maxim Melifont, 3 catches, 36 yards. Like he was spreading the ball out to a bunch of different receivers, not playing favorites at all, and just trying to find the best guy for the option that he was throwing. I was really, really impressed by him. As soon as we saw that LeCandro was out, you and I both were texting like, oh boy, this is going to be a long game for Ottawa. And then they come out firing, and Polk obviously does his thing, but I really, really loved what I saw from this offense.
Honestly, so did I. And he obviously makes the 2, major mistakes with the interceptions, if you will. Of course, trying to rack my brain to try and dissect, like, well, actually, how did they get set up? Like, was it more a mistake? Do you give credit to the defender? Whatever it was. Like, he gives it the 2 interceptions.
Well, Josh Jansen throws one. Matt Mahler throws one.
Oh, thank you for the correction. My apologies. Hey, shout out to Matt Mahler. Guy does everything, even fills up the Gatorade cooler for those GGs. But at first tuning in, because there was a bit of a hiccup in the broadcast where there was a delay in the stream, and I was texting you something not too nice about, but here's the thing, right? Is that like for the team that is like year after year ranked, if not the top team in all of Canada, top 2, like the broadcast does not even like come close to sniffing the quality that the performance on the team was. When they actually figured out the hiccup, that was the best home broadcast I've seen from a Western Mustang game in my life. That wasn't a national game, a score game of the week going back to the days of yore. But so the game finally clicks in, whatever the bugs were in the system. And once I kind of got over marveling over the broadcast, I'm realizing that ain't LeCandro in there. And honestly, my first thought was like, wow, they pulled the plug on him, because I don't remember seeing LeCandro getting hurt. And then, of course, it comes up in the broadcast. One of the two folks on the call, I can't remember their names, mentions that, Lacandro's hurt and everything like this. And, like you mentioned, the way he's connecting with all his receivers, I honestly felt watching that game, and if ifs and buts were candies and nuts, we'd all have a Merry Christmas, whatever. The way Josh Jansen was just getting the ball out and just making sometimes just the simple plays, I'm like, if he was the quarterback start to finish against Windsor, they win that game at home. Because there was a lot of plays he was making that were so frustrating that Lacandro was missing on, where it's like, and hey, like I've never played a snap of quarterback in my life. I'm not even that good at Madden. But where it's like, man, like that read was not that difficult. It seemed a pretty easy, check the depth of the DB, like whatever it was, where it's just put the ball on the guy, like a couple balls that were just at the feet of the receiver. And yeah, Jansen makes, you're correcting me, the one mistake, but just making seemingly the easy plays, taking what the defense gave him. And like, how often do we talk about that with some of our favorite quarterbacks in the league, like Danny Skelton, like Elgersma, like obviously like Hillock, where, if whatever you try and take away, you have to give something up. And if you don't want them to blow the top off of your defense, then fine, we'll chunk it down. If you want to protect towards the sidelines, let's go back to the Queens Western game. If you're trying to protect against the middle of the field to not allow them to get into field goal territory, great. I'm going to look towards the sidelines and take my shot. And it just felt like Jansen had a much more calmer demeanor. And hey, who knows? Maybe that plays into that third string mentality of like, hey, like you have to imagine that Coach Belfay is like, dude, just go out there and play football. No one is going to be mad at you about anything that happens on that field unless you give up. On Western's homecoming, when you're our third string quarterback, like I thought in some ways maybe the scenario was great, but yeah, honestly, I felt like if that was the performance they got at quarterback against Windsor, they win that game a week ago.
Yeah, and I don't think that that's a hot take by any means. Once again, if you're just looking at the scores here, they tell a vastly different story than what you actually see on the field. And Ottawa put themselves in positions to win and to be successful. There was just a lack of either chemistry or whatever it was between Lacandro and his receivers there. So yeah, I think if I'm Ryan Lacandro, I'm sweating bullets right now because this second-year kid who is right behind you just had a pretty impressive showcase here. And if he gets another couple of games to really showcase that this wasn't just a fluke, that I am, good enough to be the starting guy, oof. So if nothing else, I think that whenever Lacandro does come back, and I do wish him a speedy recovery, I think that he's going to have a newfound fire under his butt to make sure that he's doing everything possible to not lose his job that was there.
Yeah. And you know what, obviously for the Western Mustangs fans tuning in, and if you're watching, just make sure you recognize that the logo on this shirt is the London Junior Mustangs, often misinterpreted. It's not a Western Mustang top. I just really like this windbreaker. It's very slimming. It's very athletic looking. I rep my Junior Stangs. But for our big Mustangs, for our Western Mustangs fans tuning in, to quote Savon Magnay Jones's father, who I met once at a game, literally being like, you always talk about these Ottawa GGs and all these others, you don't talk enough about our Mustangs. And that's certainly what this portion of the podcast has turned into. I mean, hey, it was another great day for Evan. It was another great day for Keon. If we're being fair, look, the more interesting things happened on the Ottawa side of the ledger for this one. The last thing I will say is about those Mustangs, though not terribly positive. 11 penalties. 11 penalties, only racking up for 97, but it's still, once again, we talk about that with Windsor obviously leading the pack in the OUA with those, but even more so when it's Western, where maybe it's a team where you scored 22 points in the fourth quarter. They really just slammed the door shut on this game when they did get it rolling and stuff. And hey, it's their homecoming. Maybe they're having fun. They get a little loose, but those are those things that you tighten up the screws a little bit there, eh? with obviously for Ottawa coming off of this game, they get Panda next week, which man, oh man, I am certainly all at sorts as to where I feel about that game, because do those Carleton Ravens look pretty feisty right now. And for Western, they're hitting the road to take on feisty doesn't even do it justice, to take on the Windsor Lancers in a massive battle down in Win City. Tom, any last commentary from this game, Western's homecoming?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I took some time to call out the Western Mustangs as well. Like you said, we spent a lot of time on the Ottawa GGs here, but I mean, it's almost getting to the point where you're like, okay, come on. Western puts up another 50-point. Evan goes 23 for 27, 318 yards and 3 touchdowns. He was actually our honorable mention for Offensive Player of the Week as well. Keon Edwards, 12 attempts, 126 yards. Keanu Yazbek, 8 for 70. Even Troy Thompson, 9 attempts for 59 yards. Like, their offense was really, really working here. And, like, again, you talk about one of the biggest things that really qualifies a fantastic quarterback is the fact that there's not just one person that they're constantly throwing the ball to, which more so predicates a fantastic receiver. Like, Mohsen Jamal, 7 catches, 112 yards and a touchdown. Savad Magdi Jones, 7 catches, 75 yards and a touchdown. Seth Robertson, 4 catches, 59 yards and a touchdown. Like, the ball is just continuously being spread out here. That Western offense is just unbelievable. Although what I will say, there was a couple of times that were uncharacteristic where they were not on the same page. They had to take a couple of timeouts. One timeout in particular, there was an up back on either side that wasn't sure who should be on the line of scrimmage. And Evan, I'm sure, was yelling something because when that timeout happened, you could see some visual frustration there. So maybe the homecoming aspect of things and how big everything was getting to these Stangs, but a little bit uncharacteristic on that side. The last thing that I do want to say is shout out to Western for putting on a hell of a homecoming. Even the announcers on the broadcast were saying it's halftime and people are still coming into the stadium because there's so much going on here. I love that so much. You know, I think they really went over the top with everything that I saw in terms of like carnival rides and food trucks and all of this stuff, which is amazing. You hope that you don't need that every single time to get a packed stadium, but regardless, it's just so nice whenever you see London and both of these teams, well, 2 of the teams that are playing here in Guelph and in Western, 2 of the most amazing homecoming atmospheres for opposing players to play in.
Yeah, and as someone who spent a lot of time around that stadium these past 2 years, I think, and maybe similar with Guelph, the way they set up with the parking lot outside as sort of like you enter the venue and then you're in that space. Similar with Western, there's a lot of kind of concourse area, if you will, outside the stands. Like, I mean, Ron Joyce has a really nice concourse area in the actual stands venue, but a lot of space, as you said, to kind of bring in all those extra little frills and food trucks. And obviously being there for the Vanier last year, you saw it come out in full force. So yeah, you know, that's OUA football at its finest right there from the sort of hospitality standpoint nature of things. So, you know, yeah, a beautiful showing on a beautiful day with you know, a beautiful outing of those Western Mustangs. And you mentioned those guys on offense, and you know, I was gonna say this when we get to the Windsor game, but you know, it's when we talk about the depth at skill position, like I was very much coming out this week and being like, I kind of think that Windsor's depth on skill is perhaps top the pile, but you just going through those names, man. I mean, it's still, well, we can have that conversation maybe when we get to our sort of subsequent pod and talking about sort of midseason check-ins. But let's move on to our second game of the week, where we go to another homecoming, this one coming from the city of Waterloo, where the Wilfrid Laurier Golden Hawks take out the McMaster Marauders 36-9. You know, Tom, we use the term like westernification of OUA football a lot in different kind of contexts and capacities. And we did go into this game thinking about how it's fascinating where Laurier hosts the Battle of Waterloo last week. They put a beat down on the Warriors, then they come back and now they have their homecoming against Mac. And obviously that having to ride that energy and get up, you get up for all these games, but we know that it's a little bit extra when it's that type of environment. They can be especially draining. And kind of going back to that Westernification aspect, this is a game where we go into the half with Mac up 9-7, and it kind of felt like watching Mac against Guelph the week prior, where if you're watching, and I'm very curious to get your thoughts from the McMaster fan alumni perspective, where it kind of felt like if you're watching this and kind of being like, okay, we know Laurier's better, it's just a matter of time. That's kind of what we've said about Western for so long now, even going back to the game we just talked about, where you can keep it close, but at a certain point, because of how explosive and how physical these teams are, and in the example of Western and Laurier, and frankly throw in Windsor as well into the mix, that you look in at 9-7 at halftime, where Laurier's into that territory now, where it's just, you have really no doubt that, let's be real, they're gonna get it going. Or, and this or goes out to all you listening or watching as well, or were you actually legitimately thinking, hey, is this the sort of the trap game? Is this where Laurier falters? They're going into their bye and they perhaps were overlooking McMaster. But Tom, I throw it to you as far as when we're at half and it's 9-7, were you thinking that, hey, this is the Jekyll, the Dr. Jekyll of this Jekyll and Hyde McMaster team we're seeing? Or is this just like, whatever it is that Mac's doing, it's kind of irrelevant in the grand scheme of this game?
I would be lying if I didn't say that I was extremely excited
as you should be.
When I finally heard that touchdown call, and I knew that they were going to be up at halftime. That was an exciting time for me as a fan. But like, the thing that really tipped me off in terms of, no, I don't think that this is going to be something that's legit, that they're actually going to be in a, well, I don't even want to say tightly contested, because they were in a tightly contested game up until the first half. But when you look back at that game, especially in the second quarter, and our guy, Mad Jack Moore, called it out. And once again, him and Jason Hallgome, like, oh my goodness, just phenomenal calling. I mentioned it to him, but Laurier Athletics, if you're hearing me, you are not paying those guys enough. They do fantastic work for you. But he even called it out himself. I don't think that McMaster, I think their worst starting field position in the second quarter alone was their own 50, maybe the 55. And all of that, you only get 7 points. Like, they were winning the field position battle. That defense, once again, was playing phenomenal in that first half and doing everything that it kind of could to put their offense in a position to win. And thank God Keegan found Cooling in the end zone. That was great, but it's the same thing. It's the same problems every single week, regardless of the opponent they're going up against. It's the same issues. It's like the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Like, you have to change something here. And we just haven't really been seeing that. So when I saw once again, struggles that they had on offense, the lack of production in certain cases, and, I don't want to start calling out individual players, but like, I'm sure Matthew Gale, receiver for McMaster, is just sick to his stomach. He dropped a touchdown pass. He had a couple of drops himself that, were in key scenarios here, but he wasn't the only person that had that. And, I've said this before. I really, really, truly believe, especially after seeing everything that I saw in Burlington and I saw here, I think Keegan Hall has the capabilities to be an all-Canadian type quarterback, but he doesn't, the pieces around him are not in place. That's what I'll say.
Yeah. Well, to the first point you brought up, shout out to Michael Horvat for the job he did in the kicking game, pushing Laurier back when Mac had to give it up. And then subsequently, as you said, Mac's defense stepping it up. And then obviously those Hodge punts, sort of irrespective of the returning game that Mac was netting. You could have the best kicker in the world, but when, Horvat's pinning you deep to start with and you're kicking some, setting Mac up with some of those good field positions that you alluded to. You talk about kind of going back to the same things for Mac, and whether or not you clearly believe in the talent of Hall, and it's one of those things where like,
well, you haven't seen it. You haven't seen it. How could you believe what I'm saying if you haven't seen it?
Well, you've certainly seen, like, whether we've seen a full 4 quarters of it. I mean, because we could have seen it, but he got taken out at half at the York game. Where like I am a believer that like despite who you're playing, there's no accidental. I don't think we see accidental greatness in OUA football games. There's a difference between being great for one game and then being a great player who then, as we know, someone who does it consistently week after week and even some cases year after year and things like that. But the team clearly believes in him, or at the very least, if they don't, they have as little an opinion of their run game as you possibly could have. And like we've seen enough games now where, he goes 14 of 32, 165 touchdown and interception, where we've seen now games, because obviously we've cushioned some of the commentary about high passing outages from quarterbacks, sometimes being a product of like, yeah, you're behind in a game. You're going to have to pass to come back. But as we've said already, this is a game that they're leading going into half, right? And so I guess I'll pass it back to you on that. Like, we've talked about the struggles on that offensive line. We've talked about the missing, them missing Daniel Bossett. And at this point, like, I'm trying to even remember, like, I swear we saw him against Windsor. Like, I swear he was on this roster. He's on this roster. I don't know. Like, it pains me to think what type of injury or circumstance he must be dealing with to miss this many weeks. And of course, as I mentioned him before, I'll mention him again. Of course, though a rookie, hey, my guy Noah Amaral in the backfield, though a rookie, not expecting a terrible amount of production from him, but like it. So you've seen the potential. He has his passing mate in Cooling with them. We're still not seeing Priestner there, but we do like some of the talent they have here. Like, what is it like? If they committed to running the ball more, kind of at the expense of wherever the score and the game's at, like, would they get more production? Like, can they? Like, is that just where it's at now, where teams are just like, look, it just doesn't matter. Like, hone in on Keegan Hall and like just rally to the ball elsewhere. Like, what's going on, man?
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to be careful of what I say. Last week I had the opportunity to go out and watch a football game at my old high school, Assumption High School, and I ran into Murray Drinkwater, who gave me a bit of crap and said, "Go easy on Mac, man." So I'm trying not to be as harsh as I have been, but even what I will say, being in that scenario in Burlington with a lot of people who have been around the Stampeder program and the Nelson program and have seen Keegan, even they're starting to get a little upset as well with how he's kind of been utilized, not only this year, but in previous years as well, where, maybe there had been times where McMaster had either been really up or had been clearly out of the game. And despite that, Andreas Dueck stayed in and Keegan Hall wasn't given the opportunity to have more reps and things of that nature. But that's neither here nor there. Talking about this team right now, once again, I really think that it comes back to the offensive line. They do not respect the run game because they can constantly tackle their running backs in the backfield. Now, I don't think that McMaster has a star running back per se. I like the work that I've seen from even Braden Kelly this last game. I like what I saw there. Daniel Boss has been good. Jacob Mason, their fullback as well. He's done some good things, but they obviously don't have like a Keon Edwards and Amilcar Polk type in the backfield. But even if they did, I don't know if it's the offensive line is just not where it needs to be, or if they're not calling the right kind of plays for them. Maybe this offensive line would do a lot better in a power run scheme rather than a zone run scheme or something along those lines. But there doesn't seem to be any attempt to do anything different from the run game. Every single week, it seems to be the same kind of stuff. Maybe there's a toss in there. Maybe there's a jet sweep, but you're really not changing anything. And to me, that points to, we don't think that we can get this offensive line to change in that time frame. So I really think that shocker, offensive line are really important to offenses in order to do successfully. But I really consistently, you look back at everything that's happening here. There is no run game. Keegan Hall is constantly having to run for his life. You can get pressure with three people, and now you don't have a quarterback who feels confident stepping up into the pocket. Rather, he's rolling out to his right or his left and taking more unnecessary hits. So I really think that it has to come down to this offensive line play.
Yeah, I'm not gonna argue with that type of. I'm not gonna debate against that type of argument. Obviously, I'm a firm believer in that as much as anyone who knows the game of football does. We really should talk about Laurie, but I think the last thing I just want to kind of throw you away is because I think we were both in agreement coming off that Guelph game that this kind of up and down nature of this MAC season, believing in some of that talent, especially liking some of the things on the defensive standpoint. That after that Guelph game, being like. At least I recall saying, like, I am certain they will play better against Laurier. I said it in the week 4 review pod. I said it in the week 5 preview pod, and I'll say it again now. Well, obviously, we now know the outcome. What enough for me to think that they would win this game, but I'm certain this MAC game will have a better outing. When you put the score aside, did you feel like MAC, and it's hard to put the opponent aside because that obviously dictates how well you're going to perform, but like, if you can forget the, no doubt disappointing nature of this game, maybe, I mean, you didn't pick them to win this one. Maybe you thought it'd be closer, but did you feel like they performed better off of that really just like emotionally devastating loss to Guelph for all the reasons we've already talked about?
I think they did because the defense specifically played very, very well. I mean, we've seen this Laurier offense for the past couple of weeks now and everything that they are capable of doing. And I really want to get into Laurier because they just played so fantastic in this game, but they only had one touchdown in the first half. That defense was playing lights out. I really loved everything that I saw. They forced Elgersma into an interception, which he rarely throws those. So, I was happy to see that despite everything else that's kind of happening, the defense is continuing to get better and better each and every week. I asked Jack what he thought in terms of the sideline with McMaster and how it was, because you and I have talked about how is there not more dissension on the team, and he said to their credit that defense. Sure, obviously you're upset, but they gritted their teeth. Something bad would happen and go out onto the field. I mean, I think it happened 2 or 3 times where the defense comes up with a takeaway, whether it's a fumble or it's an interception or something. And then that same drive, McMaster does something where it's a fumble or it's an interception themselves, and they're right back out onto the field. And so despite all of that, the defense is still coming to work every day, trying their best to do everything they can to put them into a position. So yeah, I thought they played well, but you look at Laurier's offense, and it's only a matter of it's only a matter of time with them. Taylor Elgersma, 31 for 40, 430 yards, 2 touchdowns and 1 pick. Like he's on a roll now, and he is obviously very confident and everything that you can see. Ethan Jordan, 12 catches, 179 yards and a touchdown. Raiden Thorne, 10 catches, 121 yards. Oja Talayo, 4 catches, 114 yards and a touchdown. Like, these receivers and this quarterback play is some of the best in the OUA, and I'd put it up against anybody in U Sports. And oh, by the way, our individual passing yards per game leader across U Sports, that would be Taylor Elgersma. He is just playing so lights out right now. He's number 2 in passing touchdowns at 13, only behind Evan Hillock. Like, the passing attack for this Laurier team is just outstanding. And I really wanted to make sure that I'm calling that out because they deserve all of the accolades here. They look fantastic.
And I don't have the number in front of me, but I was looking at it earlier. I mean, you say only behind Evan Hillock. What is it, by like 2 touchdowns?
That's correct. Only like 2.
So,
and that's in like 3 games.
Exactly, right. I mean, it really is. It's beautiful football they're playing, and it's so explosive. Like it really has that feel of tuning in for when you watch some of these American college football games, the way that they'll just have these guys run all over the field like it's a track meet. And then you pair it up with what they have going on that defense. You already mentioned Ife Onyemenum and the game that he put together on the defensive side of the ball. And just, you kind of jokingly kind of raised how, Ife's probably, hey, actually, first off, if Ife's listening to our podcast, like that'll make my millennium to know
That's a win for us.
That's
Hell
a
yeah.
big win for us. And that the whole idea of like, everyone's talking a lot about Ethan Gorsuch. And hey, obviously rightly so, but just that idea that you have this, I guess, fifth-year veteran in Ife coming back off of a CFL stint in training camp with this first-year kid, true freshman coming in, the master teaching the Padawan or whatever kind of metaphorical like language you want to use. That defensive line, like I feel like it's almost in the way that we joke about with Western, where it's such a known commodity that it's easy to kind of forget about it. I mean, like, when's the last Luke Brubaker conversation we had? I mean, and at no fault of his own, he's still putting up stats with the best of them. And, they have so many of these players, and I feel like defense, there's a lot of positions in defense that you do rack up those very game turning stats, like we said, with Ife getting the 2 interceptions, and when guys like Kaladi and Windsor like just racking up sacks like a madman, that really do stand out. But it does, and as 2 former offensive linemen, I feel like defense has that feel of just like they're just out there just. They're bringing their lunch pail, they're putting on their hard hat, and they're just getting ish done. I mean, it's such a impressive task when you see teams, as rare as it happens, move the ball against them. And when they do, you just know it's going to come to a sudden halt before that team is netting 6. I mean, you go back to how obviously happy you were seeing Hall connect with Cooling for that touchdown. I was like I said, not that I thought the game was ultimately going anywhere. I was literally watching that being like, shoot, like, good job, Mac, man. Like, right on. That was some good stuff. We're obviously on our sort of additional episode we're going to have tied on to the back end of this one, talk more about some of these individuals and this team as a whole. And we're kind of just getting into a bit of like every week we're doing this, but the sky has to be the limit for this team. And until we see them play the Laurier and Windsors, the Westerns and the Windsors of the world, like there's no reason to think that this team can't beat anyone. And I don't know where the argument would even begin.
No, I think you're absolutely right. We're starting to see once again Jack Moore being a something of a knowledge base, or looking into his crystal ball and seeing how everything's going to work out this season. They've got top players at every single position that you can think of, and they're starting to now really perform. It's not like they're just, came out the gate and whatever, but they're building towards something. And that's really what it feels like here, is that they've got the mindset. This is a marathon. It's not a sprint. We don't need to come out flashy and doing whatever, because we got the win against Queens. We secured the win against a Carleton team that came out firing against us. We're 5-0 right now, and I believe going into their bye week.
Yes.
Like, this is a very, very dangerous team in every aspect here. We saw Tanner Nelms come back here and get the bulk of the carries, 16 attempts, 74 yards and a touchdown. Quentin Scott, 4 attempts and 45 yards. So we're starting to see now the 2-headed monster for the run game really starting to come alive. I think the offensive line is starting to play decently well. If I had to pick an outlier, I'd say it's probably the offensive line in terms of all of the position groups, but it's only because they're playing good and everybody else is great. So that's my only thing that I am a little bit hesitant about. I just want to see a little bit more consistency from that O-line. But still, with everything that we've seen here, with the unbelievable numbers we see week after week after week, offensively and defensively, and it really feels like that defense is just who's going to step up this time. Grigorcic has done that a couple of times. Efi just came through and was like, hey, don't forget about me. I'm still one of the best linebackers in this league. You got Brubaker who's in there. Like, it really just seems like anybody can make a play at any time here. And a lot of times they do. This is a fantastic Laurier football team.
And as you said, they are going into their bye week, and they wrap it up with an Ottawa, Windsor, and Western 3 in a row on the tail end of their schedule, which is just going to be so spectacular to see. And for Mac, we've kind of talked about this for a few weeks now, where they have Toronto, Waterloo, and Ottawa, I believe, is the final team before they then sit out for that last week of the regular season. And hey, we'll get into our preview pod for next week. They're taking on the U of T Blues, but you certainly look at a team in Ottawa being like, my goodness, I mean, that's a tall task for them. And hey, we're not shy at kind of speaking some praises about Waterloo, despite some of the end of game scores they've been on the tail end of. So it's despite the up and down nature of McMaster's season, it doesn't seem like it's going to be the Marauders' years. I don't know what to make of this team right now, but perhaps we'll have to dive into that when we have less on our schedule taking up our time. So let's put that one to bed and then move into the nation's capital, where the Carleton Ravens were hosting the U of T Blues, who we mentioned are taking on Mac next week. Carleton picks up this win 46-7. And Tom, we talk about team identity, and we kind of, especially with Carleton coming into this year, where it's the second year of Coach Grant being at the helm. We talk about Tarandy Young kind of moving out. We're not sure who the quarterback's going to be. The run game needing to get together, a really young offensive line, a lot of guys in the defense we like, but ultimately kind of it's been the theme. And I even think Deshaun mentioned it on one of his podcasts of this kind of like, Carleton, like, who are you going to be this year? And we talked about it on our last pod, where they are certainly, we thought Mac was the air raid team. That is certainly the stamp that Carleton has put on their season. Now, of course, as you mentioned, the Corey Grant connection with Mac obviously kind of connects those two programs, going back to that 2019 Yates Cup season for the Marauders, that I was kind of, doing the Zach Galifianakis mental math to kind of be like, wait a second, maybe Mac does have a pathway here. But obviously what Coach Grant's doing there is just so phenomenal. He has obviously all the trust in Tristan Lefebvre, giving him 41 attempts, completing 27 of those, picking up 329 yards, 4 touchdowns and the 1 interception. Some interesting things to talk about on the U of T side of things. I mean, this was Carleton, like, not necessarily getting up on them right away early, but they get that momentum going and it just snowballed pretty quickly. These Ravens, man, are perhaps one of they're the darling of this season, man. They're stealing my heart. And man, something about that Ottawa football. There's always something good happening out there.
I can't believe how much of an Ottawa football fan you are, and you've barely been out there to watch a game.
Never even once.
That Panda game should just be called the Bader Shamai Bowl.
It doesn't sound as good as Panda Game, but hey, it's a suitable second. I'll take that. What are you making of Carleton now that we've seen them now get to the midway point of their season, 2-2?
Yeah, I'm liking what I'm seeing from this Carleton team. I was a little surprised, if I'm being honest, at how slow or how long it took them to really get things going on offense against this Toronto team. And shout out to the Blues. On the preview pod, I did say that this Toronto Blues team is going to play the best football of the year because they're coming off of that bye week. They have the confidence going into Carleton, and I really think that defense played decently well. Now, obviously, Tristan Lefebvre does his thing. 27 for 41, 329 yards, 4 touchdowns and 1 interception. He goes off here and tries to kind of establish himself. Hunter Brown being his favorite target, 5 catches, 98 yards and a touchdown. Like, he was real. This was an impressive game for this air raid offense, as you were saying here. I was a little surprised at the lack of running, or at least the lack of success that we saw on the ground. You know, Alex Gale, who I thought was having a decent enough game, 11 attempts, 29 yards, including a long for 11. So really not a lot happening on the ground here. And once again, shout out to that U of T defense, obviously doing a lot of things there. But yeah, I really liked what I saw from this Carleton Ravens air raid offense specifically.
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting looking at some of those receivers. You know, this is obviously, well, not obviously, but this kind of feels like, you know, you read what you read off what Jordan and Thorne did for Laurier this week, and we obviously talked about coming off the Battle of Waterloo game where neither of them scored touchdowns. And you look at where you know, Lefebvre's hitting his guys, and you know, our dude Kasim Ferdinand, you know, out of that sort of big four they have of the receivers of Brown, Reddy, Hashi, and then Ferdinand, only one of the mix to not make it into the end zone, and obviously he still gets targeted 6 times. And you know, this is me just kind of like painting narratives out of just like what I'm seeing on the games, from the games, and just looking at the numbers where like it's just it's getting to that point. And once again, you know, maybe making that connection with the MAC team where when you have all these weapons and you can identify obviously Kasim as being, you know, the guy amongst the batch there, where, you know, if a team's going to game plan to say, okay, hey, look, you know, they got a lot of guys out there, but we know that 27, I think he's wearing 27, is the one who can perhaps hurt us the most. Maybe that's where, you know what, safety shades a bit more towards his side, or, you know, we have a little extra attention paid to him. But that's then where, when you have, you know, and maybe it's to the fact that you have a new quarterback coming in the fold who doesn't necessarily have that, doesn't really, I guess, he hasn't played enough games for the Ravens to have like a safety blanket per se. So he can just say, okay, cool. It's Hunter Brown on this one. It's Tristan Reddy. It's Frederick Hashi. Perfectly fine. And once again, going back to that piece on culture that that Coach Grant's building, you know, that's where it starts, where guys are willing to say, hey, it's going to lead to the W, then that's what we're going to do. And you brought it up on the last pod we did, where it's like, as much as, you know, I keep saying about getting the run game going, and obviously, you know, just, you know, being a Josh Ferguson fan and all those things, where it's just like, that's just not what they do. They're not a running team. And we talked about how young that O-line is, and maybe next year we'll see something else in the mix for them. But for right now, the way they pass the ball, it's so spectacular. I just, you know, why go to anything else?
Yeah, no, certainly. I mean, when you have the success that you've been seeing here, why would you want to go to anything else? Like, I'm very, very happy to see it. And it's interesting because I'm now starting to almost question us and the idea of like, yes, Kasim Ferdinand is phenomenal. Don't get me wrong, but we haven't necessarily seen the unbelievable breakout game yet from him, but rather him be a really solid cog in the overall game plan that is this Ravens offense here. And I don't even think that if you look at Kasim Ferdinand, like he would be somebody who's upset about, oh, I'm not getting the catches that I want, blah, blah, blah. I think that he's just happy to make sure that everybody, this Ravens offense is really starting to click and kind of go forward here. I mean, the other thing that I kind of want to bring up, and I've been looking at this kind of just double taking and seeing that this doesn't make sense. Toronto total offense, 20 yards. I can't, that has to be wrong, right? It has to be.
Ooh, 20 yards. Yeah, that's
Scott Barnett, 3 for 10 for 18 yards and an interception. Kinsale Phillip, 3 for 8 for 9 yards. Scott Barnett takes off running for 8 yards. Lucas Stoikos, 8 yards. Like, that can't be right. It's just unbelievable. I know that this Ravens defense was playing lights out, but 20 yards? That seems like it seems fake.
Did Ife Onyeka get like a 20-yard tackle for loss at some point in the game that I'm just not seeing? But no, I mean, hey, even if that's a mistake, whatever, if that's not the real number ain't pretty. And,
Well, sorry,
sorry. My
sorry,
apologies.
no, go into that. I did look into that a little bit more, and I think we have our answer here. Um, Carlton's defense finishes with 8 sacks for a total of 43 yards and 12 tackles for loss, totaling 51 yards. So there's your offense.
Yikes. Well, I'm somewhat dumbstruck by that.
Mm-hmm.
That's staggering. And it obviously was staggering enough that, hey, Carlton knows they don't need to go to anything else but what they got cooking right now. But this isn't the first time. We've now seen U of T say, we might need to. You already mentioned his name. They turned fairly quickly the keys over to one Scott Barnett at the quarterback position over Kinsale. And, it's just like, I guess here's I guess my thoughts about U of T right now. We go back to we go back to 2019. 2019 was a great year for OUA football.
Oh gosh.
We go back to 2019 and they have that explosive year with Clay Sakara, the Bird Gang, Tommy Dennison just saying, hey, everyone go deep and we'll see who can catch it. But then they finished 2-6 that year, amazingly, or maybe it was only 3-5. We see them sneak into the playoffs in the COVID year. It just feels like, it feels like the theme with Toronto football, and I extend that to York, that any positive signs, because we certainly saw some positive signs last year when we saw Kinsale take over. We've yet to see anything sustain for these teams, because like right now. And I don't know, we talk enough about OUA football without me wanting to do too much of a deep dive into like Scott Barnett's background and what his status is with his eligibility and things like this. And like, what does this mean about the future? And I know Kinsale's a bit older, but like, there's obviously not all that much. I shouldn't say obviously, but there's not a heck of a lot I really want to talk about with this team from this game. Shout out to Carlton, just doing your thing. Great game by you guys. Mm-hmm. For Toronto, I'm just literally left being like, I feel so cold on this team. I just don't know what to make of them, and it's so disappointing off of just some of the spectacular things we talk about. Our guy in Josh Ferguson for Carlton. I mean, Adam Williams. And once again, I don't like throwing this at the feet of any of the players, but after seeing him grind it out for what felt like a decade at U of T, just on some teams where even when they were kind of good, they were getting all their success passing it. Then he has a couple breakout games last year, including against these Carlton Ravens. And it's sort of back to tough sledding for him. So I don't know, man.
Yeah, it's really heartbreaking to see Toronto not be where they were last year. I mean, they were easily one of my most favorite teams to watch. We've talked about it before. Seeing U of T be, I don't want to use the word relevant, but be competitive and be within the OUA playoff landscape is just so amazing for OUA football in general. To have a storied program like Toronto making sure that they can get in here. So it is disappointing to see that, but man, can we talk about this Ravens defense for a second?
Please.
Oh my goodness. Like 8 sacks, but not only 8 sacks, Christopher Tupin, Medley Joseph, Michael Lightbody's in there, Caden Boomer, Ethan Buxall, like I think there was 8 different Ravens that got all of these sacks. It wasn't like there was one person who just kind of went off on this. And 12, count it, 12 tackles for loss. They were living in the U of T Blues backfield this entire game. And man, you want to talk about a Ravens team that has that vindication now. You know what? Yes, it was an embarrassing loss last year against Toronto in Toronto. It really gave a sour taste in everybody's mouth. Blah blah blah. Now your offense has clicked, really has in this past game. Your defense puts up historic numbers. Like they've got to be breaking records here. And you're going into arguably your most important game of the season in the Panda game next week. Man, is this Carleton team set up for success?
And especially just to stick on that comparison, at least to invoke the comparison with them in Ottawa, going into that game where Carleton is soaring high, flying high off of the success they've had. And for Ottawa, obviously, it's been a tough couple of weeks with injuries and things like that, and picking up 2 losses in the process. So kind of 2 trains passing in a night in a little bit, or hey, maybe it's 2 trains on the same track colliding with one another. We'll see who can knock the other one off the rails. Yeah, no, this is a really fun Carleton team to watch this year, and I can't wait to see them keep on soaring, because right now we talk about what the season's been for Mac, as well as U of T, where it's funny where you think about teams like Guelph and Carleton, where it's like 2 teams, and we'll talk about Guelph in just a moment, where 2 teams that really are establishing themselves, and I won't jump the gun in terms of the commentary as far as the midway check-in, establishing themselves as kind of being, once again, it's hard. We'll have the conversation soon about, is it like how many teams are in that kind of top tier? If we can include other teams along with Western, and if we aren't, they aren't far behind, and we know who those teams are, but that solidly next group of teams. I mean, hey, despite obviously some really rough Guelph appearances early in the year, but certainly just stick with Carleton, because they had those games against Laurier and Western where they looked super sharp. You have to say that Carleton, if you're a Ravens fan, you have to be over the moon, because don't place money on this team making it to a Yates this year. I wouldn't say. Maybe you don't place it on them getting to a semifinal matchup, but to maybe cause a top seeded team a couple quarters of serious panic and anxiety in a quarterfinal matchup come the playoff time. Oh, that's got Carleton's name written all over it for this year. And maybe they steal that game. So yeah, shout out to Carleton. And once again, shout out to Coach Grant, everything he's doing there. Shout out to Michael Lightbody when he got that sack. Despite the name, our man's not a light body. He is a big boy up there in the middle on that D-line, and he showed the world what that belly's looking like. And it's looking big and fierce, much like he is in that whole defense. So anything left from you on this one, Tom?
Just a phenomenal barrel from Michael Lightbody. It was just fantastic to see. Yeah. Like you said, if I can reach to the top shelf for another big boy word, the dichotomy between Carleton and Ottawa right now is really something to be interested in. But all bets are off when it comes to the Panda game. It really is. I will never forget watching this Carleton team go 0-8 in 2013, and the very next year win their first Panda Bowl in a shocking upset. Shout out to Nate Bahar and his unbelievable play that got them there. So all bets are off when it comes to the Panda game. Whoever plays the best is going to be able to win that one. So I am excited for that one.
Well, we'll save that commentary for the Week 6 preview pod. Just saying Week 6 kind of tripped me out there for a second, but nonetheless, that is going to be the preview pod we are doing later in this week. But let's move over to the Royal City, where the York Lions came to take on the Guelph Griffins for the Guelph homecoming and fell to the tune of 88-7. I thought the Western game was going to be the day that York gave up 100 or more. Man, in the first quarter, I was thinking that it was going to be this one, because we talk about teams rolling, teams getting it going early. This is a game that was 35-0 when the first quarter hit 0. Guelph took no time in getting anything rolling. We talked about we talked about the performance of Tristan Aboud. Obviously with his guy, Vishan Janusis and the rookie and Willem Arsenault racking up big yards for them in the receiving game, what Malloy did on the ground, this team was like I don't know, like a bottle of Diet Coke with a few too many Mentos in it. It was just ready to blow. Man, Tom, what did you think about the Griffins in this one?
Well, you talk about unbelievable play. Like, it's not even 5 minutes into the first quarter, and it's 21-0. The opening drive, Tristan Aboud finds Janusis for a 52-yard touchdown pass, and then York gets the ball. They go 2 and out, kick it to Anakin, and he takes it back to the house. And then York gets it. They go 2 and out. They kick it back to Guelph, and then they put together another drive where Tristan Aboud finds Caden Stevenson, and he goes 26 yards into the end zone. And there's still 10 minutes left in the first quarter. Like, man, regardless, the way that they were playing and the chemistry and how things were going were really something to be mindful of how special this team was. My insiders, once again at Guelph here, I asked them, and I was reaching out to them and seeing what they thought of the game. Obviously, they were on site, and beginning of the game, Coach McPhee is not out with the defense, but Coach Carter is running them through that 30 front and doing everything that he needs to for this defense. So there is something happening there. However, I did hear a little bit more that the coaching strategy at Guelph across the board has switched up a little bit here. Apparently, Coach Sheahan has had his hands off from the offense a little bit more. I believe that's going into Coach Soria. Mark Soria is going to be taking over that. He is the offensive coordinator, but this offense is very much reminiscent of the Queens days, and Ryan Sheahan had a lot to do with that. But it sounds like he's taking his hands off the wheels for this offense and allowing Coach Soria to really kind of come into his own here and see how that goes. Similarly, on the defensive side of the ball, obviously Coach Carter has started to take a little bit more of a responsibility there in helping out the defense. However, Coach McPhee is still very much a part of this process here. So a little bit more of almost loosening some of the reins in terms of who's doing what right now. But when you look at the coaching staff that they have there, just purely based off of the experience that they have, there's a lot of experience going around here. Obviously, Coach Sheahan and Coach Soria, part of that 09 Vanier Cup team. Coach McPhee, the unbelievable list of coaching experiences that he has had and everything that he's done. And obviously Donovan Carter and all of the successes that he's seen as well. So I think they're starting to lean on this coaching staff and get a little bit more creative here. And obviously 88-7 is a hell of a way to start that off.
Yeah, I mean, those are some great insights that you were able to snag there. I mean, certainly when Guelph trotted out on the field for their first defensive series, my eyes immediately went to like, okay, how many guys are out there? And it was that same 30 front that we were talking about, that you were identifying with the specificity of having the sort of Donovan Carter, like watermark on it, if you will, where those ends are very tight on the tackles, and then letting their guys like Brandon Ferrigo go to work. And of course, you shout out Javon Jacobson in the MAC game, picking up that interception to kind of put the nail in the coffin in that matchup, picks up another interception in this one. And, it's really all coming together. And we talked about for Guelph how just the flow of their season, it really shapes up well in terms of kind of when their buys coming up and just some of the matchups as far as, they get Waterloo next, and Waterloo, when you obviously compare what MAC and what York can do, is the best running team of that trio, and it's not just a function of neither York or Mac being good runners. We like who Waterloo can try out there and run the ball with. So it'll be really interesting to see how this team faces a much different stylistic offense that Waterloo will be able to put out there. But just offensively, it's just the consistency we're seeing now, because once again, going back to that Laurier game, they were putting together drives early. Obviously against MAC, they're putting together drives not only early, but once again, I'll go back to that leading drive that Aboud led them on, hitting Janusis for the touchdown to put them ahead at the end of that game, where the pieces are all there. And this has been such consistent commentary when it comes to talking about Guelph for the last, nearly 10 years now, where it's like they have all the talent in the world, which is then what makes them such an easy target for people who aren't necessarily fans of the Griffins. And there's certainly plenty of those people out there, where it's like, you have all the luxuries in the world, all the resources in the world, some of the best recruits. I mean, obviously, commentary we've had about what Schaefer Baker did or didn't do during his time there. All these things, and it's like, okay, the talent is actually performing. And of course, all this to be said is we've mentioned as well, without Isaiah Smith there in the backfield, but they don't seem to miss a beat. And we've obviously established it. We can talk as much game as we want about the performance of any team when they play the York Lions. And though I don't expect this to be a replicable outing by the Griffins, let alone any team in the OUA, there is starting to have that feel of, the Aboud to Janusis combo is certainly one of your one of your more certain bets when it comes to just connections between a receiver and a QB, and it's happening at just the right time. As we've now said, we're crossing the halfway point of the season.
Certainly. Yeah. They talk about a time where you've kind of found your rhythm here and you're starting to really showcase what you can do and everything. So I'm very excited for this Guelph team. I think that they are coming on at the right time. I think if they're making certain changes in the not necessarily full on changes, but if they're switching certain things up from the coaching perspective, I think that's only going to help them here and try to lean on some of the other experiences that some of the other coaches have had. The only other thing that I will say is that apparently Anthony Martuzzo's injury is he's re-aggravated the injury that kept him out last year. So we're hoping that it's not going to keep him out for the remainder of this year. However, it might require surgery. So, he's still kind of week to week as things going here. No updates yet on Scott Murray either. We're hoping that he can come back as well, because if he comes back to that D line, it's going to be very, very dangerous here. I'm really excited, like I said, about this Guelph team. I think they're coming on at the exact right time. I think their schedule kind of leads into a really favorable one, where they're not exactly playing the toughest of the tough in the next couple of weeks here, or at least next week at the very least, and then have the opportunity to really own their destiny here and not only make it into the playoffs, but have some favorable placement and maybe even fight for a home playoff spot here, which would be, I can tell you, playoffs in Guelph, talk about phenomenal atmospheres. That's one of them.
Hey, man, you hit the nail on the head there. And I love too, just like that ramp up mentality they have with teams going into the playoffs, where it's going to be like, those will be like playoff games when they take on Queens and they take on Carleton for their last two games of the season, at least from the standpoint of like teams will have, we're about to talk about them shortly, but like Queens, that you can already circle that one on their schedule. That's going to be a must-win game for them. And after what Queens did to Guelph last year, you talk about Carleton wanting some revenge on U of T this year. I'm certain Guelph hasn't forgotten what they did. Tom, you brought up the mystifying nature of U of T's total offensive numbers from their game in Carleton. Because I'll admit, like once we got into the second half, I wasn't paying that much attention to this game anymore. But Tom, Guelph didn't punt? Guelph didn't punt?
Guelph did not punt once in this game.
That's not allowed. I thought that was... Holy jeepers. Okay. Wow. Okay. That I don't know if I've ever seen that.
No, I can confidently tell you I have never seen that in a U Sports game.
Yeah. Ken Waller, you have been assigned your homework for the week. I'm sure you will tag us in some post within the next couple of days with a stat line from the days of yore, or maybe not so yore. Who knows? Maybe we're forgetting something spectacular, something somewhat recently. But yeah, I mean, hey, like wow, 88-7. I don't know what else to want to say about this one. Guelph's rolling. They did their thing. They got up on them early. York.
Yeah.
Whatever. Shall we, Tom?
Yeah, if you can't say something nice, you shouldn't say anything at all. Let's go, Queens Windsor.
Queens Windsor. Oh, here we go. Wow. First and foremost, Mr. Brett Hedges. As Tom claps, get a little closer to the mic, Tom, so we can hear those claps. Purely, first and foremost, for rocking the solo booth. A tip of the cap, a job well done for, as I saw on Tom, you had tweeted out a shout out to him and Jim Mullen, of course, raised the obvious just comment on it's like, yeah, you're having a conversation with yourself for 2.5, 3 hours, which is just spectacular. But of course, Brett, thank you for the shout out on your call. Now, Tom, we talk about, we're getting to that point in the season where it's just, you mentioned Mortuzo's injury. We talk about Lacandro being out. This game, I think we have to start with the absence of one Alex Vreekin at the quarterback position, seeing Russell Weir in at starter. I don't know if you have the full details or details just in general of what that's about. But man, did it just make me make my stomach turn, because right away I'm like, it's James Keenan last year, and this year it's Vreekin. So what do you know about Vreekin's absence in this one?
Well, Brett Hedges did call it out on the call here. Allegedly, we don't want to say anything, but allegedly, Alex Vreekin suffered a broken arm on his non-throwing arm in the last play of the Western Queens game.
Last play for Queens, or was this like
the last play that he was out on the field?
Okay, I was gonna say, did he punch a clipboard or something when Magnate Jones was walking into the end zone?
He was the one who kept saying no.
Well, Tom, what do you make of that non-throwing arm? Is that? Do you have any sense of is that something that we can then see him again, or it's he's got to catch the darn snap? What I don't know. This is the season from hell for the Queens Golden Gales. No
kidding. The amount of things that seemingly keep going wrong for them, it's tough. It's tough to be a Golden Gale right now. I can tell you that. I think that depending on how severe, obviously, that fracture is, if it's a hairline, maybe. If it's a full on, then I think it's safe to say that Mr. Vreekin's day is done here. And man, talk about throwing your quarterback into the fire. Obviously, nothing that these Gales could do. You got to play against the team you got to play against. But Russell Weir playing against an unbelievable defense for Windsor here. Man, they played lights out in this game, but really made his day tough. So Russell Weir finishes 16 of 26, 142 yards and 3 interceptions, and there's one quarterback who comes in there to sub out Anthony Leo. He goes 0 for 1 and 1 pick. His only throw that he gets is another interception for these Windsor Lancers here. So, it was a tough day for the folks trying to throw the ball. But even you look on the ground, Jared Kasari, 12 attempts for 64 yards. Anthony Souls, 18 attempts for 62 yards. So they were obviously really trying to lean on that run game, but that Windsor defense stacked it up, and specifically that D-line. Oh, my goodness, they played just phenomenally. We obviously called out Mufta already, but even despite the stat line, the stat line doesn't even do him justice. He was constantly in the backfield. If he wasn't making the play, he was affecting the run or affecting where Russell was going. He had to take out and run a few times where you can see his rushes for 6 attempts for 39 yards. Like, this Windsor D-line, I think, is the best in the OUA right now.
You're not going to get an argument from me on that one. I mean, the pressure they're putting on these quarterbacks, and then, obviously caveat Russell Weir being a younger kid, but forcing him into decisions where he ends up giving up those 2 interceptions that, Windsor houses. And obviously mentioned the one that Mufta had, and Devin Verisa getting the other one, taking it 75 yards to the crib. Great call by Hedges on that one. The Windsor kid in his own right trying to reestablish Windsor football, put them back on the map. And, just one of the, another theme when we look at just what makes this team special or different or a bit of both is obviously the influx of Americans. And obviously it feels like, maybe a product of just historically them kind of only recently coming back into something of prominence with Coach Cercelli taking over in 19 and all these things, and now kind of learning about some of these guys on the team. But obviously all these different Americans that we see popping up, and you look at a guy in Ethan John on the defensive side of the ball from them, hailing from Felton, Minnesota, racking up, what was it on the day, 12 tackles or something like that out there. I mean, it's really clicking on all levels in such a phenomenal way. And, obviously when you have, when your offense takes a step back, in the case of a situation like this where, your quarterback's out and what have you, it's still worth noting that Queens defense is very strong. And obviously 14 of those 23 points in the third quarter come at the hands of what that defense does for Windsor. And, because you look at the game, Danny Skelton, 10 of 18, 131 in the air, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. No Joey Zorn in this one. Wavy Mambo, 7 for 46. Christopher John, 7 for 14. The Queens defense, with the cards stacked against them more so than it already was, just going up against a team whose offense we really loved, obviously save the fact that Joey Zorn wasn't in there, did their thing, and then just was put up against the wall time and time again. This game was in Windsor, a massive travel for Queens coming off of that emotional, heartbreaking loss against Western last week. I do have to tip my cap to what that defense did, all things considered, being able to just keep them in the game at all in this one. It really was. And not to throw shade at the quarterbacks giving up the pick sixes, but if there's a redeeming factor for Queens, you have to still say that defense is still really solid.
100%. Yes. This defense is, I think it's the real deal. I love everything that I'm seeing from these guys. I think Owen Hubert was, he had a pretty solid game himself for these guys. Van Wishart, like Liam Sutherland, getting the 1 sack for Queens. You look at, you only have to do look at the numbers. You already read out Danny Skelton's numbers. Total offense for Windsor was 174 yards. They really could not find a rhythm on the ground here. Mumbo being 7 attempts for 46 yards. Christopher John, 7 attempts for 14 yards. They really didn't see a lot of success here. And if that defense for Windsor doesn't step up, this is a very, very close game if you take away those 2 defensive scores here. So, yeah, I think that I think this needs to be a little bit of a wake up call for this Windsor offense. You can't just lose your guy in Joey Zorn and suddenly everything goes to hell here. And I'm not saying that Mumbo or John isn't good enough to step up as well in the running game, but you go back even to the preview pod that we were talking about here. I said, I don't think that this running attack is going to have the success that it normally does on the ground because this Queens defense is legit. It's going to come down to Danny Skelton being able to win the game here. And I'm not convinced that if they don't get those 2 scores from the defense, that he does enough to win the game. So unbelievable shout out to the Windsor defense, 100%, like godlike performance for sure. But this Queens defense is legit, and they are very, very good here. And I'll leave it up to you and your thoughts. Did they expose a little bit of Windsor's weaknesses on offense?
Well, I mean, and here's where it gets interesting because obviously we've talked about Joey Zorn not being in there. And from, I think, I don't know if it was on the broadcast or if you heard it somewhere else.
Yes. Sorry, I will. My sources tell me, once again, Mr. Hedges, Joey Zorn seems to be on the mend. He is week to week. But if I'm the Don and if Joey Zorn is out, that's my answer regardless, because I don't want to give those ponies any kind of a sway whether or not he's playing or not, because he's a huge part of that offense.
Absolutely. And, obviously with that, if that Vreekin injury happening in the game, I guess Queens could have kept that under wraps, but Hedges obviously knew that information as part of his game prep. And so, you partly wonder, and though we obviously have all the admiration in the world for what the Don's building there and has built, and just like the culture he's establishing, but in some ways it almost feels like that kind of goes into part of the narrative of what's maybe, and once again on that subsequent podcast we do, what's maybe keeping them from being quite at the Laurier Western stage of, oh, Vreekin's out on this one. I know what, we're going to rest up Joey, keep him healthy for this one. We'll pick up the win at home, all these things like that. Maybe some of those things came to bite them. Maybe they're reading their press clippings, even though, of course, as you highlighted, this is a team that no doubt is thriving on that underdog mentality, no matter how far they get. So, but it's still a good showing though. And to me, like we've talked a bit about some of these skill position units on different teams, specifically with Western and with Laurier, and to me, Windsor, obviously that three-headed backfield monster of Zorn, of Mambo, and John is as good as anyone has going. But I do love what week to week, and spoiler, caveat, this one, what the combo of receivers of Ginn, Cunningham, Thrasher, Johnson, and even Amoa have been doing for them. This week, the production was down. Obviously, I like guys like Stephon East in the defensive secondary, Eric Colonna for Queens, and some of the other guys they have out there, Ashton Miller, Melanson, some of the better defensive secondary guys. So, you know what? It's just, we talked about Laurier having a couple of their prove-it games coming up. We've been looking at this area for Windsor as a prove-it time for them. And at the end of the day, whatever you want to say about, was it a bit of a down performance for them? Hey, they picked up the win on the road against Ottawa. They picked up the win against Queens at home. Say what you want about injuries or whatever you might want to. They get Western at home. They get the bye. They hit the road for Laurier, and then they finish it with York. So, I mean, once again, that's kind of the troubling thing where we're going to have our breakdowns of everything kind of going out the halfway point of the year. But at the same time, it's like, for Windsor, I need to see you play one of those two teams. But, hey, we thought Queens was one of those two teams. We thought they were the big dog. I mean, and maybe this is just the curse of hosting a Vanier Cup where, obviously Western wins the Yates, but they can't quite make it there. And I mean, if you thought that Queens was going to, be hosting a Vanier Cup they were playing in, man, oh man, I think that bet might have gone south a couple weeks ago now. So I don't know if I'm ringing the alarm for Windsor offensively, but at the very least, as I obviously did, they're throwing out a little bit of fodder for, is it maybe still a bit of sloppiness? Like, this is a game that like your defense balled out on, like, but who knows? Who knows exactly where that lays? Because Queens just has a phenomenal defense, no matter what. Tom, for Queens here, this is the thing where like they go on the road again next week to play York. And obviously the main point of attraction is going to be, is Vreekin back? But hey, Russell Weir is obviously good enough for them to, win that by 50 or 60. We obviously know that. Part of me almost, I mean, yeah, get the win, get the mojo back and going, I suppose. But, they get a team like Carleton the weekend after that where it's like, I want you to play a real team and to kind of have your stuff going, because I don't know if that's gonna be the thing that gets them back on track. And maybe it's as simple as being like, if Rican's out, that's gonna put a limit, a lower limit on this team than we suspected. Like, what do you think has to happen right now for Queens, other than obviously starting with just getting Rican back, if he even can come back?
Yeah, there's a lot of question marks for this Queens team, especially offensively. It hasn't seemed like, even when Freakin has been in, that it's been the same Freakin from last year, which is surprising because he was a first year last year. Like it's very, very interesting to me that there's, or sorry, at least a first year starter. It's very interesting to me that this Queens team is seeing some struggles here when they have so many returners, especially in the secondary. With Jared Kasari, you got Anthony Souls, Nico Cuomo, Aiden O'Neill. It just, there's something that's going on with this Queens team. There seems to be something that's a little bit off here, and maybe it is, the Vanier Cup coming to Kingston, all of the pressure that's been on them to finally get over the hump of beating Western, because you haven't done that in, I think, something like 15 different attempts. So
Yikes.
it's been a very long time since the Golden Gales beat the Stangs, and I really think the last time they did it was that '09 Yates Cup. I'd have to go back and double check it, but I really think that was the last time that they did it. So yeah, it's been a while for these Gales, and
Wow.
whether it's the pressure that's there in order to try and beat your longtime rival in the Western Mustangs, hosting a Vanier Cup at home and wanting to be a part of that, obviously every year, but especially this year where you have the opportunity to do it at home. Maybe there's some additional factors going into play here. And like, the other thing that I don't want to, just kind of gloss over, and I think we've already talked about this, but the new Lang Pavilion that's in there, and the unbelievable facilities that they now have, courtesy of Mr. Stu Lang, who, and maybe this is another segment for another podcast, but can you name a person that's done more for the OUA than Mr. Stu Lang, with all of the improvements that he's done to Guelph and Queens and all the stuff that he's tried to do behind the scenes as well? That man is just a saint. Anyways, when you have a facility like that, there's an extra pressure to play well. Because in my opinion, and I don't know how you feel, there's nothing more embarrassing than having the top of the line facilities, unbelievable everything. You've got the jerseys, you got the swag, you got whatever else, and then you follow it up with just poor play. I think that's really, it can be really detrimental to a team in certain cases here. And it adds another layer of just, we have to almost match the unbelievable donations and the facility around us, if that makes any sense.
No, like that's the Guelph narrative from the last decade, right? Because all that was coming in at Guelph with Lang in the early 2010s as that program was building up with those three really strong recruiting classes we had, and some really remarkable coaches that we had, that led to finally getting over the hump, planting the flag, going beyond whichever Langism you want to use, to winning that Yates in 15. And then kind of afterwards, after he had left and they got back to a couple of Yates, they had a couple really good seasons where it just at least from afar, it feels like that, whether you want to say Guelph earned that in the first place, where Stu Lang was just like, hey, you know what my pet project's going to be? I'm going to turn the Guelph Griffins into a Yates Cup champion. That's what I'm going to do right now. Whatever deserving means. And then with Queens, obviously him having the connection there, being his own alma mater, where, I mean, I'm still kind of dumbstruck by you saying that that '09 Yates might be the last time that Queens beat Western. That blows my mind even to think about that one. But we've had these two appearances by Queens in the Yates Cup, the 2021 season. They have to go through the OUA East to get there and play a schedule of OUA East teams to do so. And hey, last year Like that team was great, and obviously they had Jan Longa as well in that backfield. You got James Keenan at quarterback for a good part of that year. That was a really good Queens team. And I don't know what's going on this year, but like pretty well aside from last year, like was like 2013 the last like really good Queens year when they go to a Yates and then lose to Western in that one, and then so hey, a lot of interesting things going on, and it'll be fascinating to see what direction that they move in, because there's obviously certain programs where the standards are just higher. We talk about with your Marauders, the standards are just higher. And with Queens, it's certainly the case of being one of these legacy programs. So it's going to be hard for them to turn it around, at least in this season, with the time remaining, as it is quickly ticking away off the clock. And like I said, I don't even know, like they'll pick up the win at York next week. No one's doubting that. But with Carleton, Guelph, and Ottawa to close out their season, and they're sitting right now at 1-3, so they'll be 2-3 going into that stretch. I mean, hey, 5-3 is possible, but that'll be, and that's, I guess that's part of the story too. That if they end up running the table, if they they pick up the win against York, they end up going 5-3. They beat those teams, Carleton, Guelph, and Ottawa. Then that means they will be on a heater, hitting the playoffs, and whatever Vreeken's health is at, and that defense obviously is good, and the running backs, it's weird. It's just it's a bit of a weird season, because like we said with Guelph, the talent's there. So who knows? Tom, any final thoughts on this game, or kind of on the Queens conversation that it kind of morphed into?
Yeah, I'm really interested to see what this Queens team is kind of made out of here. It's funny because we keep saying that each week, or at least it feels like I keep saying, oh, we're going to find out what this team is made of. We're going to find out what their identity is. And then something happens that takes away a big chunk of that. You lose a guy like Alex Vreeken, and how much does that affect your identity? Not just as an offense, but as a team. Do you have the mental fortitude now to say, you know what? Despite that we don't have our star quarterback here, we can still play with the best of them, and we can still pull out these big wins, and we gotta do whatever we can in order to try to get there? Or is there now some question marks in terms of, obviously nobody's going to outright say it, because everybody who plays for Queens and everybody who plays at every program is competitive, and they're only ever going to give their best effort regardless. But is there now a little bit, when you're in that scenario, say it's the third quarter and you're down by 2 scores, are you kind of looking around going like, oh man, we're in a bit of trouble here? Or are you sitting back and saying, no, you know what? We have the talent here. We have the capabilities. We can do this. So that's what I'm really interested in seeing here. I think they're going to build some confidence going into York next week and getting another win there. Obviously, Russell Weir, if he is going to be the backup or the starter in this case, he's going to gain some confidence there, and they're going to do a lot of good things just based on everything that we've kind of seen. But playing against a Carleton team that's playing at like they are right now, and depending on how things go kind of next week, that's going to be a huge thing. Playing against Guelph, where not only are they playing really well, but every single time that Coach Shang gets a chance, he wants to hang at 80 points on the Golden Gales for what they did to his papa, as he likes to say. Like, this is
how he words it.
Oh yeah. But this is not going to be an easy rest of the year here. And there's a very strong possibility that when they play Ottawa, I believe the last game of the season, that's going to be for both teams a win and you're in kind of scenario. So it's going to be a grind it out, claw with your fingernails type of how badly do you want this? And I'm interested to see who shows up for Queens. How badly do they want this? Because it's going to get tested very soon.
It certainly will, and you bring up that Queens Ottawa game at the end of the season, and it's just so amazing how the OUA season goes, where we were pointing out that last week of the season could be a chance where we get to see Western and Laurier duking it out at 7-0 apiece. Who's going to have the right to host or get the bye week and get the home field advantage through the OUA playoffs, but certainly thinking about Queens and Ottawa as the B+ A tier teams that we also had up there with the likes of Western and Laurier, and thinking that those could be two, say, 6-1 teams going into that one, and who's going to secure the second seed, or depending on how they did against perhaps the loser of that 7-0 matchup, who could then steal the second seed, and all things like that. And as you said, as we're now getting down the pike with Ottawa being in the shape they're in, I mean, both these teams are obviously stricken with injuries at the quarterback position. In the case of Ottawa, 2 times over. It's now a situation where, yeah, you worded that beautifully. It could be a situation where this is the result of one of these teams trying to get into the playoffs, which is just crazy to think about. But hey, that's what makes sports so amazing. That's what makes football even that more amazing. And of course, when we're talking OUA football, every week there's going to be something coming up that is going to make us scratch our heads and just wonder what on earth is going on here. So, let's wrap it at that, Tom. A phenomenal weekend of football. Once again, these offenses, some of these offenses are really hitting their stride. We're seeing explosive scores across the board. You'll be getting this podcast on Tuesday, on September 26th. We're going to be posting on the 27th as soon as this one finishes up. Shortly, we are going to record the mid-season pod we've been promising you for a while now, answering the questions that we've been getting over the last couple of weeks. And as always, thank you for sending in your questions. Thank you for consuming our content, whether through the video, the audio, however it is you are consuming it. Just thank you for staying plugged in. So we'll talk to you in a day's time right here at the 55.